Greetings, welcome to Psych 101. Today we're talking about hunger as part of the chapter on motivation and emotions. So psychology pays attention to biopsychosocial factors. As scientists go, we're among the more broad-minded, I suppose, at least aspirationally. We don't always assume just because we're a psychologist that something has a psychological cause, or even a primarily psychological cause. So when it comes to hunger, there are some biological explanations that seem to be mostly true and cover much of the phenomenon. For example, when your stomach is empty, the contractions of the stomach send signals to your brain, specifically the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus knows what those signals mean. It produces hunger hormones like ghrelin, and low blood sugar does the same thing, triggering the hypothalamus to communicate with the glandular system to produce the behaviors of hunger. So eating theoretically reduces satiety. Reduces hunger and creates satiety. There we go, that's correct. So like if you want to eat less, one strategy you could employ is before you sit down to eat, pound an 8-ounce glass of water. Then your stomach will start to feel full before you've started eating, and you'll start to feel satiated before you're done with your meal. All of this, of course, means that people absolutely stop eating when their stomachs are full, right? Right? Yeah, right. Is it possible you keep eating for other reasons? Remember, we're taking the biopsychosocial approach. The book seems to end more or less on the biological approaches and not really get into the other factors. I'm going to get into some other factors for you. So all sorts of reasons that you might continue to eat. I'm autistic and have some mildly obsessive compulsive traits that go in there. If there is tasty, tasty sausage in the refrigerator, I almost can't sleep until I've eaten the tasty, tasty sausage. The mere existence of food puts food front of mind, and coming from our evolutionary history, where most of our ancestors were mostly starving to death most of the time, the mere existence of food can prompt you to pop it in your mouth holes. The best place to store calories is inside the body. So when you have access to food, the tendency is to get nice and fat to survive the lean times that we all know are always right around the corner. It just feels good to eat food, probably for these reasons. Food is in itself inherently rewarding. You enjoyed eating that greasy slice of pizza, and even though you don't need any more pizza, wouldn't it feel so good to eat one more slice? Sometimes food's distracting us from our emotional states. Do you eat when you're anxious? Do you eat when you're depressed? Do you eat when you're scared? Do you eat when you're just bored? Do you eat to reward yourself for not eating? So you've stuck to your paleo diet all week, and your reward for eating the way you imagine your Paleolithic ancestors ate is on Fridays you get to eat cake. Can you spell self-defeating? Sometimes you're eating just because other people are eating. I mean, there's a million reasons why you could be eating food other than your stomach is contracting and your blood sugar is a little low, right? So why have all these different kinds of explanations? Why a bunch of different perspectives? Well, because we need all the perspectives. Remember, in the first couple weeks of class, we talked about the idea of there being a statue in the middle of the room. Maybe it's a statue of Shaquille O'Neal. And everyone in the room describes Shaq from their perspective. Who's right? Well, assuming a moderate level of intelligence and the ability to articulate their thoughts, I mean, probably everyone's mostly right, right? And who's wrong? Also, everybody's wrong because they're missing some of the information. From their perspective, they're describing accurately what they see, but everyone's wrong to the extent that they discount all the other perspectives. So none of the perspectives in motivation explain all of the situations all of the time. Each partially explains some of the phenomena of interest, but if we put them all together, then we start to get this, this much fuller, more complete picture of the phenomenon. So one of the lies you learned in high school is that there's always one right answer and always one way to get at that right answer. You learned that mostly in math class, right? When someone gives you an equation, there's a step-by-step algorithm to solve that equation. You have to show that you did that step-by-step process and then show that you got the right answer. You can get partial credit often for just doing the step-by-step work. And that really only applies to math, man. For almost all other human activities, there is not one right answer and one way to achieve it. So let's move into some other perspectives. The psychological perspective. Eating's just rewarding. When you eat, you feel pleasure, and when you're rewarded for doing a behavior, you're more likely to do that behavior in the future. And if you're sad and you eat and you feel better, you're getting negative reinforcement, right? The feeling of sadness goes away, which means that when you break up with that crazy boyfriend and you eat a pint of ice cream, the next time you're having a breakup, you're more likely to eat that pint of ice cream to feel better. The presence of variety causes eating. So, do you ever go to like the Chinese buffet and everything looks so good, but there's 36 different dishes out today? You go, well, I'll just try a little bit of a few things. And you don't just try a little bit of a few things, right? You give yourself like a full helping of everything. And 4 plates later, you're sitting there, hardly able to move from the chair, feeling disgusted with yourself. The mere presence of lots of different kinds of foods prompts most individuals to want to try as many things as they can. Variety is kind of good for us in safe circumstances. Okay. Container size. If you are, I don't know why you'd want to be, but if you're trying to be a little bit thinner in the modern world, one thing you can do is get smaller plates. Take all of your dinner plates and chuck them in the trash and serve dinner on your dessert plates or your bread plates. Because when you see a big plate, you want to fill up that plate. Um, and this is the backbone of like the frozen yogurt industry, right? When you go to the frozen yogurt place, it used to be that you could get sizes of container. You could get the sample size, like the little mouthwash cup at the hospital. You could get the kiddie size, and then the small, and the medium, and then the large size. But now there's one size at Froyo, and it's KFC bucket. Okay, because they know when you put 4 ounces, a reasonable size of Froyo, you put 4 ounces in the bottom of that giant bucket, it looks lonely. Okay, when you fill up a thing, there's no more room to fill the thing up, and it looks satisfying, and in fact it is satisfying. When you have a lot of space, it looks empty. In proportion, the amount of food that's on the plate looks small, even when it's actually quite large and excessive. All right, so container size absolutely matters. We measure things in proportions and ratios. Social norms. Maybe on a regular dinner night, it's normal to get one serving, but on Thanksgiving Day, it's normal to eat until we're all over full, until we're all uncomfortable and sleepy. So there's a few big eating holidays. Maybe you do Easter dinner, Christmas, Thanksgiving, maybe something else, and those things normalize certain kinds of eating behavior, eating to excess. Hey, where do you think serotonin comes from anyway? Serotonin, one of the component chemicals of it is carbohydrates, which is why comfort foods are comforting. When you're sad, why do you go for simple carbs like chocolate and ice cream? Because serotonin is built out of those simple carbohydrates. It's built out of the stuff that makes up pasta, the complex carbohydrates. All right. So maybe your go-to dinner is spaghetti Alfredo when you're feeling down, and you always feel better. If Atkins hadn't died of a heart attack, then he might have died later of suicide. People try and take all the carbs out of their diets, and what that tends to do is crash your serotonin system, leading to the symptoms of depression. That's why it's so hard to stick to a no bread diet. You absolutely require carbohydrates in your diet. Maybe not as much as you're getting, but if you're getting more than you should be getting and you cut back, you can see why that would cause problems, even if you're cutting back to a normal healthy level. And then more behaviorism, sort of associations and cravings. Do you get a giant hot dog whenever you go to the baseball game? Baseball and hot dogs, right? Goes together like any two things that go together. So you can create a whole bunch of associations and cravings. Movies, movie theater popcorn drenched in butter. Make your own list, but they are legion. The number of things we associate with food or specific kinds of food. Grandma's house and cookies, all kinds of stuff. The hospital and lime green jello, whatever. All right, and then there's the factors that are kind of bigger than us as individuals, that are society-wide problems, structural problems sometimes. So society has this way of normalizing bad foods. We are really, really hesitant to regulate what goes into food products and how those food products are advertised. So some snack food manufacturers will tell you, snack like you mean it, and like make it seem like beef jerky is for tough people. It's tough, and so it's for tough people. And so you're sitting around eating absolute crap because they're showing you celebrities eating crap, or wrestlers or something. Just normalizing awful, awful foods that you should never really put into your body. We have food porn. So the Food Network in particular is notorious. Stuff like Iron Chef and Beat Bobby Flay, and people making these really extravagant meals, sometimes from salvaged ingredients. And the more you watch that stuff, the more you want to emulate that stuff. So we're in Albert Bandura land here, if you see what I mean. Monkey see, monkey do. And it just, again, it's normalizing extravagant food, if not necessarily very bad food. Although some of the people you're watching, who's a lady who got fired because she was a flagrant racist, but she made everything starting with a stick of butter, She made coffee with a stick of butter. I don't know if you remember the lady. Oh, did we talk about high fructose corn syrup? This says again, but I don't remember talking about it the first time. Well, let's just let's do high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup, HFCS, it's a problem. Sugar is natural. Fructose is a natural chemical. Plants make it. Fruits in particular are high in fructose. But just because something's natural doesn't mean you should consume it. Cyanide is also natural. It's found in almonds in particular. If you eat a lot of almonds every day, your whole life, you will eventually die of cyanide poisoning. But just because you can eat toasted almonds in moderation and not die of cyanide poisoning doesn't mean that you should concentrate the cyanide and then eat that. It's deadly poison. So what happens is we have a government where we're not really keeping very close track of who serves on what panels. The agricultural panel decides which foods are subsidized, which crops in particular we're subsidizing farmers to grow. And they also decide how much of their budget is spent on food stamps, on food assistance for needy individuals. Not coincidentally, most of the people on that panel are farmers, and not regular Farmer John farmers down the road where they have a few acres. Farms under 1,000 acres are a thing of the past. There's a few left, but about 3%, if I remember, 3% or less of farms in America are less than 1,000 acres. These are giant, humongous, mechanized factory farms. And what do they grow? That's right, they grow corn. So every year when it comes time to look at the budgets and the crop subsidies, are they choosing to give more money to food stamps, or are they telling you that people on food stamps are moochers and playing on your racism, even though most people on food stamps are white? No, they're cutting back food stamps year after year after year, and they're activating your sense of moral justice and indignation to get this done. What else? Are they subsidizing leafy green and cruciform vegetables, which would be good for us? No, they farm corn. So of course they're subsidizing corn. What does that mean? That means we're paying farmers, factory farmers, who make the laws. We're paying them to grow corn. They grow so much corn, we can't possibly eat it all. And rather than export the excess to countries that have hungry people or move it around the country to make sure everyone has something to eat, because capitalism, we render it down into high fructose corn syrup. You can't stockpile corn, it will rot and be good for nothing. We experimented with making it into ethanol, but oil doesn't like competition. That was a disaster. So it gets boiled down into high fructose corn syrup. So much high fructose corn syrup that HFCS is the cheapest staple on the market, which means that everything is made of high fructose corn syrup. Get it? So if you're rich, you can afford to shop around the outside of the grocery store, and that's where the food is. That's where there's bread in the, you have your bakery and you have your dairy, milk and eggs and milk products, and your butcher, so your meat products, and your greengrocers, where we grew things. Corn is in there, but things other than corn are in there. But if you're poor, you have to shop around the inside of the grocery store where everything is made of high fructose corn syrup. So I was just looking at an article in The Atlantic maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And their case is that if you ate in 1980 the way that you eat today, if you ate the same volume of food and the same kinds of food, you'd be much thinner in 1980 than you are today. It's very difficult to be thin in this environment where we're eating poison. Okay. Another sociological factor, sometimes we have food deserts. So this means there's not a grocery store in your neighborhood. Maybe you live in a poor and historically poor neighborhood. There just aren't groceries. To get to the grocery, you have to take a train or even 2 trains and then go back home with all your stuff in plastic bags at your feet, negotiating the subway system. If the subway stops near you, in which case in other cases, you might have to take a train and a bus, and it just is not practical. So the place that sells food in your neighborhood is the local 7-Eleven, right? The Quickie Mart. And what do they sell? They sell junk food. They've taken to selling whole pizzas. They're quite expensive for whole pizzas, but $10, $11, $12, you can buy a pizza, take it home, feed the family. But if you're feeding your family 7-Eleven pizzas and gas station corn dogs and stuff in cans sometimes they have, you're not going to be raising a healthy family, right? So the activists in this realm have done a lot of work over just the last 5 years. Actually, they've started to make some changes here, such that the bodegas and the convenience stores and so on are starting to carry leafy green vegetables. We've set up supply chains and subsidies to get that to happen, so people can buy groceries in most of America at this time. So those are, we're just touching the very tippity top of the iceberg on this stuff, but just some of the various sociological factors around eating behavior, and hunger. So we did perspectives. What about metabolism and body weight? Remember that your metabolism is going to be affected by biopsychosocial factors. One idea, it's about 30 years old probably, is the metabolic set point. So the idea is that some people would have faster metabolisms and some people would have relatively slower metabolisms. Meaning that if you and me ate the same food and did the same amount of exercise, we might have different outcomes in terms of body weight and body composition. This idea lacks broad empirical support. It's an idea that's out there and people get it, but there's just not enough data really to suggest that that's true. We're really working with the model of calories in and calories out. So how many calories do you take in, and then how many do you burn off doing exercise? Quite a simple idea, holds water. Even that can be changed because human bodies aren't that efficient. You'll store away a certain number of calories based on how many calories you eat, but also some calories are wasted. So people do seem to have more or less efficient metabolic systems. All this is to say, really, that you have a perfect body. And because we're on video, I can't be making specific eye contact with specific people while I say this, thank goodness. Your body is perfect. By which I mean, based on what you eat and your metabolic rate and how much you exercise, your body couldn't really be anything else, could it? Your body perfectly reflects the society that you live in and your behaviors within that society. It couldn't be anything else. Okay. Right. So an issue with the biological set point idea is that it might tend to blame the individual when situational factors are in play. We look around and we see an increasingly heavy American populace and even heavy children, and what we want to do is blame the individuals for the choices that they're making. But remember, we're making choices in contexts. We might be more or less educated about food systems. We might have more or less access to exercise facilities, even things like sidewalks or safe neighborhoods. And so when you're looking at someone and you disapprove of their body type, first of all, stop it. Second of all, it's really hard to allocate blame on individuals when we have massive structural inequalities. So high fructose corn syrup and poverty are really the two leading predictors of someone having a high body weight. Okay. So let's talk about that. Let's get into obesity a little bit. Our primary medical measure of obesity is body mass index. Maybe you've been in the service and you know all about body mass index, because if your BMI gets too high, then they stick you in what's lovingly referred to as the fat boy program. And that's where you have to wake up early every morning and go to extra exercise formations to get your body mass index down into the acceptable range. And so you already know some of the problems of BMI. BMI was never really intended as an individual measure. It only accounts for two factors. It's the ratio of your weight to your height. And as we all know, muscle is relatively heavy and fat is relatively light. So that if you're Army infantry and you run 10 miles 4 days a week with everything, including the kitchen sink and your commanding officer strapped to your back, you're going to be built like a brick shithouse. Yes? You are going to be square, and your body mass index is probably going to be quite high. There might be no fat on you. All right? They've made you very, very muscular and therefore very heavy. And then sticking you in the fat boy program to run extra laps in the morning is not going to be helpful, and probably also isn't going to be necessary. Your body is perfect. It perfectly reflects your activities and your experiences. So this is a statistical tool. What we want is body mass for a population over time, okay? It doesn't account for body composition, but let's be serious. Are we all Hans and Franz? I don't know if you remember these guys from Saturday Night Live. It's the two like fake bodybuilders, and they sound Austrian like Schwarzenegger, and they're like, "We are Hans and Franz. We are here to bomb you up," like that. That's not us, right? When you see that since the 1970s, body mass index has gotten relatively higher and higher and higher, and an explosion of high BMI in children, it's probably not because all of us are Schwarzenegger under the 300-pound bar, okay? So do you want to lose weight? Again, I'm not sure why you would. The associations between excess body weight and poor health, they're somewhat true, but they're exaggerated. Like, there's very little about being overweight that would lead one to be unhealthy, okay? Even diabetes. The old school thinking on this is that high body mass leads to diabetes, but the new school thinking is at least some of the time, diabetes, the precursors of diabetes lead to high body mass. Your insulin system changes, you start storing too much sugar as fat, and it sticks to your body. A predictor, though, of diabetes is high body weight. But is it the high body weight causing? There are really very few physical ailments that would be caused by high body mass. You can be fat and fit. All right. Uh, you've mostly been in my classroom and haven't done this online. You've seen my body. I was just in for blood work recently, and my blood work comes back perfect. Almost no risk for heart attack, no higher than anyone in the general population. Lipids are good, blood sugars are good, no precursors of diabetes, right? Uh, so I'll just leave that at that. But correlations and causation. We see a correlation. There is a correlation between high BMI and poor health, but it's not necessarily true that the high body weight is always causing the poor health. It's probably true in this case that there's a Z. X isn't necessarily causing Y. Y probably isn't causing X, but Z is causing X and Y. So a sedentary lifestyle and eating a lot of unhealthy food and in excess of calories, those things are bad for you. They lead both to high BMI and to poor health outcomes. So why would you want to lose weight? I don't know that you would necessarily. And attempts to lose weight for the sake of losing weight often fail. Diet programs usually fail because they're restrictive, they're impossible to stick to. Um, exercise programs, specific exercise programs often fail because they're a drain on your resources, and they're boring and painful, and they suck up your time. So we tend to get partial results out of diets and exercise, then stop doing them, then gain back all of the excess body weight we had tried so hard to lose. Okay, so your solutions here are not diet and exercise programs, but healthy lifestyles. Exercise more, eat less. There it is. Incorporate that into your life. Find healthier foods that you actually enjoy. Trick yourself. Get those smaller plates and be satisfied with a little less. Do that as part of your lifestyle. Find exercise that you like to do. Do you like to play golf? Because you're going to walk miles and miles and miles playing golf. When Pokemon Go hit cell phones, I had a tween-age son, and we walked 100 miles together that summer catching Pokemon. I like to walk. When the weather's nice, I'll go out. I average 4 miles a day. And I know you've seen my body. I'm fat as hell. I'm just telling you that it takes a lot of exercise to maintain this body. And if I didn't do that amount of exercise, then I'd be even larger. This is 2020. Okay, so there's that. Brief note on eating disorders. If you want to talk more about these, take either, what did I do? Take either abnormal psychology or take Psych 102. We'll touch on this briefly. But just basically 3 kinds of eating disorder. Anorexia, that's the person who, they have a body dysmorphic disorder, which means when they look in the mirror, they see someone who is fat, no matter how thin they actually are. It's in the realm of delusional disorder. And they also have obsessive compulsive traits. They're rewarded for controlling the amount of exercise they do, and especially for limiting the amount of food that they eat. This often is when there's no other source of power in their lives. They're powerless in other domains. The last thing you have control over is your own body. Anorexia can be extremely dangerous. People are maintaining low body weights and even trying to shrink very low body weights. So people will hit like 85 pounds, we'll hospitalize them because the malnutrition is at risk of causing brain damage and cardiac distress. So we'll hospitalize until you're at least 100 pounds. Bulimia, This is the person who wants to restrict their calories, but periodically their ability to not eat is overwhelmed by their need to eat. It's like trying to hold your breath until you die. Most people, nobody could hold their breath until they die, and most people restricting calories can't restrict calories until they die. So they're overwhelmed with this urge to eat, and then they binge eat, but then they throw it all back up afterward. They throw it all back up afterwards. There we go. So we'll see like a roller coaster body weight up and down and up and down and up and down within usually a 10 or 15-pound margin. Some serious tooth decay, because when you're throwing up all the time, you're getting stomach acids in the mouth and especially the back teeth. We can see some bone density loss. You're metabolizing some calories. You know, you eat a big meal and it takes time to do that. And what you ate first starts to metabolize. But things like calcium are going to take longer to metabolize. You keep throwing up all your nutrients. Some kinds of nutrients just aren't going to make it. So either of these are going to see a shortened lifespan, and especially the anorexia is going to result in a reduced life expectancy. Can be fatal in and of itself. And then you have your binge eating disorder. And this is the person who doesn't want to eat, but periodically, again, their hunger overwhelms their self-control, and they eat, but now the dam is broken. And like the alcoholic who's had one beer, one is too many and 100's not enough. And so we go on this eating rampage, but don't throw it back up afterwards, but do have all the associated feelings of guilt and shame and self-disgust. So comorbid with these things often is depression, sometimes depression and anxiety, high body weight, obesity, is bad for self-esteem. So what happens is you get depressed, and when you're depressed, one of your recourses to feel better is food. And so you eat, but then you get heavier, and then people start looking at you differently. And you look at yourself, you've internalized the standards of society as thin and pretty and fit and all that stuff. And so you get more depressed. And your recourse for depression, right? Your circle of friends is getting smaller because you're not as attractive anymore. And so your recourse for that is even more eating, which causes even more depression. And it's this sort of vicious cycle. So that's it. Don't want to say any more about eating disorders for this class. You don't really need to know any more than that. So this has been hunger, and that's it. Okay, bye.